McDonald, everybody. I recognize some things. Executive Director of Fair Wisconsin. And actually here, I'll try to speak more loudly. So we're one of a few statewide LGBTQ advocacy organizations, and we focus on civil rights and policy advocacy. A lot of people might be the most familiar with our organization from the marriage amendment campaign so many years ago and those efforts to achieve marriage equality. But for a very long time, even before the now 5 years ago when we achieved that, we've been working on non-discrimination as a core piece of our work. So working to or striving to eliminate all the different forms of discrimination against LGBTQ community and people's different intersecting identities within that community. So we're based in Madison. In 2013, our organization was a merger of Fair Wisconsin, Madison-based, and Equality Wisconsin, Milwaukee-based, and we kept the Equality Wisconsin logo and the Fair Wisconsin name. So there's some connection there. We are currently still based in Madison, and with that, I will kick off the panel to invite the different panelists to introduce themselves. We'll just start with Jason and go down the line, and then I will start with the questions that we have, some basic questions that we've selected to get the conversation going, and we can also make sure we have a chance to take questions from the audience too. So I'll hand it over to Jason to introduce himself.
Well, good evening. My name is Jason Wright, he, him. I'm the president and CEO for the Wisconsin LGBT Chamber of Commerce. We are a statewide business advocacy organization made of about 670 different LGBT-owned and allied businesses from around Wisconsin, really focusing on the economic inclusion lens of how are we ensuring that we are getting full lived equality. And for us, we approach it from the business and workforce development side of what are we doing to help LGBT-owned business owners thrive and be successful. I always joke that we want them to make more money so they have more money to give back to the community, to continue to do more great work within the community. So we're excited to be here.
Oh, and she, her, I don't know how many times I forget to do my pronouns, especially in the evening after a long day full of meetings. Thank you.
I'm Shelly Gregory. I work in an organization called Forge. We've been headquartered in Milwaukee for 25 years. We've been around for 25 years. A good portion of our work is national, and a smaller portion of our work is here in Milwaukee. We're an anti-violence organization that's funded primarily to support trans and non-binary survivors of violence. So sexual assault, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, hate crimes, those sorts of things. As part of that, I support folks here in the Milwaukee area with connecting people to resources, getting them things that they need. And we do lots of trainings, technical assistance, and consulting with agencies and organizations around the city to help them become more knowledgeable in serving trans folks.
My name is Jonathan Snell. I wear a couple of hats. One of them is with the Equal Rights Commission for the City of Milwaukee. Our role is to promote equity and equality for all, and to protect people from discrimination through education, promotion, enforcement. Also wear the other hat with the Milwaukee LGBT Center. I'm on the board there and chair the governance committee.
My name is James Stewart. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the prevention supervisor for the MSN team at ARCW, which will be known in 2020 as Vivint Health. I also oversee the prevention team in the Kenosha area. I am a part of a national fraternity, New Phi Zeta Fraternity Incorporated. I am on the statewide action planning group for HIV in the state of Wisconsin. And I do a lot of events and programs. I support a lot of events and programs that my team wants to do out in the community, where we target the Black and Brown same gender loving community, get them engaged with prevention services while also creating safe spaces for them to be their authentic true selves while spreading messages around you equals you, normalizing HIV, and trying to continue the conversation around crime.
My name is Livia Royal-Rapis. So for my day job, I work as the praise organizer for Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. So I do kind of like Latinx, Latino outreach with our community healthcare workers. And tonight I'm also representing Voz de la Frontera because I'm very involved with that organization. Have been for over a decade, which kind of leads me to do the work that I'm doing now. And Voces is an organization that prioritizes immigrant and workers' rights and tries to bring those intersections together to make change here in Wisconsin.
Great, thank you, everybody.
And the she, her, hers are there.
Yeah, pronouns, anyone want to?
He, him.
Yeah, I forgot mine too.
I know.
Which is like any, so there you go.
Awesome. So I'm gonna just kind of start with the questions and kind of rotate through calling on one of the panelists first, but then we'll, have that, whichever person I call on, then start, and then feel free to, I think we can all just sort of chime in, and if somebody in the audience has a question, just raise your hand and I'll try to make a little note, and then, call on people when it feels like it'll fit in appropriately with the answers and things like that. So with the discussion. So the first question that we have, I will call on Shelley first to start us off. Essentially, what legal rights are missing or still to be achieved for some or all LGBTQ people in our community?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. As I think about this question, my mind immediately turns to trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming folks, intersex folks in particular in our community. I think are folks that have the least amount of legal protection and the law sort of applies the least to. And as I was thinking about this question, frankly, I really started thinking about, why are we in this place, right, where we don't have a lot of legal protections for folks, and I mean, there may be a lot of really obvious answers to that, and I think, frankly, they all really lead back to like a kind of a fundamental issue, which is that, we don't acknowledge the fundamental human rights of trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, intersex people in this country, and I think in many places across the globe. I think if we did, we would be treating trans folks very differently and intersex folks very differently. Should I define it? If folks don't know what intersex is, and I don't want to give some sort of definitive explanation, and other folks should feel free to jump in, but certainly there are folks who, when born, may have medical conditions that result in them having anatomy or other physical characteristics that we would typically find in bodies that we would assign male and bodies that we would assign female, so they may have physical characteristics of both. And they may be things that are obvious, and they may be things that really aren't obvious, and they may be things the person themselves will never discover. A lot of it is hormonal. But what can happen is that, intersex people can be born with what is referred to as ambiguous genitalia. And that's where we get into an issue with medicine in the US, and the continued practice here in the US is essentially to shove the baby into either the M column or the F column and perform a surgery that we think goes along with that. And so either, make whatever is external look more like a penis, or refine it so it looks more like a vagina. And then we send people off to live their lives. And if their parents don't tell them that happened to them, they may never know. I know many folks who are just now going back in their 40s and 50s and finding, they're learning about some medical conditions they have and discovering that, they did have surgeries performed on them as babies. And, trying to find those medical records and track them down is really difficult. and we know that by changing people's bodies, we can't change their gender. So a lot of intersex folks may end up living in the way that a lot of trans folks do, which is like living in a body that doesn't feel as comfortable to them as they would hope. But what I think, we've got a lot of legal protections that we've really got some issues with, right? And we're here in the state of Wisconsin where we don't have statutory protections for gender identity. You may know that the state of Wisconsin was the first state to pass anti-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation. So employment, housing, public accommodations, which means, a business like this, any place that's open to the public. We have protections from sexual orientation discrimination, but we don't have any protections for discrimination based on gender identity. And that statute became effective, was it 82?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
82 or 84. So 1982, Wisconsin was really at the vanguard, and unfortunately they forgot about the trans folks. And hopefully someday, Megan will make that all better for all of us. But yeah, those are some real fundamental issues that cause a lot of problems for folks. I mean, those are protections that people really need, because what it creates essentially is leverage, or it creates a motivation or an incentive for employers, not to discriminate, for landlords not to turn somebody away because of the way they look. For people to be able to walk into a restaurant and use a restroom, when they need to. So, getting those laws on the books at the state level would be great. The Equality Act is something that's also pending in Congress, and Megan's probably in a much better position to talk about that than I am, and the likelihood of that moving, and maybe we'll address that at some point. But I think what underlies all of this really is, what we're talking about are civil rights, right? Rights that we have as members of society, and we live in a democracy, and so we all get together and decide those are rights that we're going to recognize and we're going to protect. And many people feel that underlying that are fundamental human rights, right? That we recognize on often an international level, and a lot of those human rights we don't always recognize, or we don't effectuate here in the U.S. And I sort of think about how we treat trans folks as not acknowledging those fundamental human rights. I mean, our bodies are not under our own control. Intersex people's bodies are not under their control. Our bodies are regulated by the state in many ways, from birth to death. If I want to get a hysterectomy as part of changing my body to be more comfortable in it, I can't do that without a permission slip from a mental health provider that tells my doctor, yeah, we think Shelley is in a place where they understand the decision they're making and they can handle it. That's not okay, I mean, a woman going to get a hysterectomy for any other reason doesn't have to produce that kind of permission slip. So I think, when we talk about trans folks and we talk about our rights and how we exist in this society, I mean, to me, it's really an issue of starting to recognize much more the fundamental humanity of people and to effectuate our human rights.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody, I just said to me, anybody else on the panel have anything they'd like to add on that?
I think.
Please.
No. You spoke first.
Spoke.
So when I think about this question, being someone who in the next few weeks will be living with HIV for 11 years, I think about how far we've come in the life of HIV. I don't like to use the word AIDS because it's so demeaning in itself, just about everything that goes with it. But I think about the fact that we've come so far to fight for individuals who are living with HIV and all the discriminatory laws about a person living with HIV, and then thinking on not just a national level but an international level, and knowing that not everyone like myself partake in things that put me completely at risk of contracting HIV, and then there are the lives of individuals who don't always disclose their statuses and how they infect other people, and how in that infection it transcends and changes a person's life forever. And then now they have to live within some states, not all states, like Wisconsin is really great at supporting individuals who are living with HIV, but in other states, and then thinking on an international level, they don't have that same support. They don't have that complete access to care. With Vivint Health, it is a medical home. It's a complete medical home, and knowing that here in the state, and then in St. Louis, and then Denver, Colorado, we're taking that medical home principle to other places so people can actually get all the services that they need, and knowing that Vivic Health is on the forefront of working with other legal representatives across the nation to change some of these old laws surrounded around individuals who live with HIV. Because one, it's not a death sentence anymore. Two, you can live a very prosperous life. You can engage in sex without contracting it to other people, as long as you're taking your medications properly. Now we also have PrEP. I think back 11 years ago, we didn't have PrEP. So the more we continue to have conversations about why it's important to support individuals who are living with HIV, also continue to spread messages around ways to prevent yourself from contracting HIV. I mean, we all know practicing safe sex and having the proper conversations. And sometimes individuals who like to go to the toy store to protect those spaces, but also pushing the conversation into needed communities like the Black and Brown, same gender loving community, not just here within the state of Wisconsin, but on a national level, allowing those people to understand that there are extra layers of protection to protect yourself from contracting HIV, and just making sure that they're getting the right messages around it, because we all know you equals you doesn't, we all understand undetectable means untransmittable, but now we're in a space where we're pushing messages around PrEP where it's 99% effective as long as they're taking their medications properly. So when we think about laws and embracing our community, that's something that sits at home with myself.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there have been a lot of gains over the decades as far as discrimination against people, who are living with HIV and have that status. And there's still a long way to go, but there have been, gains that have been made. Similarly with, people accessing care, in our healthcare system that we have when you're trans or not binary, and there are, still lots of forms of discrimination that take place and that are legal, but they're, we're making progress and we're chipping away at that. So that's a really good one. Anybody else want to?
Well, I'll just say, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and through this cold, and I'd like to thank Milwaukee Pride, who recently was on the board, and Vince Trippy for putting all of this together. It's incredible to have these conversations and to really think about and to hear different perspectives. Just to let you know about personally serving on the Equal Rights Commission, I look at every day, I ask myself, because I say you're a white cisgender male, and looking at it through my lens doesn't give you a clear picture of things, of what people are going through, what the needs are, the discrimination, the inequities, the inequality. For me, it depends on where someone is on the spectrum, or where they're in life, or how they're living and how it impacts them. So I hope we all look at it from maybe another lens at many times. So in the city, we try to offer protections that maybe the state or the federal government doesn't offer. And we also know that the federal government is quite fluid in their protections. It depends on the next tweet. And I'm serious about that. It's funny, and it's heartbreaking that we would offer someone protections and then take them away, or we would message negatively, or we would send a message out that we're not protecting everyone. So in the city, we offer protected classes. Such protected classes we've added as gender identity, gender expression, HIV status, even homelessness, veterans. So there are other protected classes within the city, and I would ask any one of you to just go to our website, which is the Equal Rights Commission, the City of Equal Rights Commission, and it's laid out there, and to share that with others. And it may be within the city limits, but it also sends a message to many people out there who feel that they are marginalized and they are vulnerable, that yes, your city's looking out for you and protecting you. And even across maybe a few counties where you may be sitting there in the closet and wondering if there was any hope or for the future, and you can see at least Milwaukee is taking the lead, and somebody out there is listening to you. Somebody is willing to offer protections for those who are victimized across the state and across this country. So wherever you live, if you live outside of the city, continue to advocate. Continue to advocate in the state. Continue to advocate in your county, your municipality. Protections across the board, they connect, and eventually maybe we will see some broader protections. Like conversion therapy ban, started in the city of Milwaukee, something we pushed, then other municipalities have picked up on it. Hopefully we'll have that on the state level in the time in the future. Folks ask me, well, does that really, is there a problem? At what level do we see conversion therapy within the city of Milwaukee? Sometimes we don't know. But again, it's that positive messaging that we're going to defend and affirm you and protect you.
Yeah, and I think adding to Tony in particular there, I think when I hear the question, what's missing, there's the obvious that we've talked about, but I think to me, when I hear the word missing, it also realizes it depends actually where you live. Mm-hmm. And that when we talk about what LGBTQ rights are missing, it really depends on where you live in this country. You look at the Municipal Equality Index that just came out recently and shows which cities are there. If you are in a city in the South that isn't welcoming, the legal rights that you are missing are probably different than what we are saying here in Milwaukee. There are some basic underlying things, but it really comes down to those that are fortunate enough to live in a community that may be accepting than others. So while the rights may be on paper, in some instances, it is what is that lived equality experience like that really is actually driving the change. And I think that's a piece as we think of the legal rights. I think of it beyond just that. It's what is that full lived experience like, because it may be on paper. Marriage equality may be on paper. Other things may be on paper, but that doesn't mean it actually, it's not how people are actually living those values and are actually living those out. So it really comes down to who's fortunate enough to live in a community like Milwaukee, where it does have those protected classes in the city. If you live outside of the city of Milwaukee and are in, rural Wisconsin, those legal rights are different. So it depends on those that are fortunate to be in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Olivia, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, there's so much to add.
Well, we're going to answer one question.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big ones that kind of stands out to me is just like when we're talking about like LGBT, Q plus immigrants or otherwise, asylum and sanctuary status are just so big in maintaining the safety that you have here in this country, and that includes if you're a victim of domestic violence, which is very high for LGBT persons, even being able to be comfortable to talk to the police department. So Christine couldn't be here tonight, right, because she's at talking with folks. I don't believe there's a commission meeting tonight, but working on a policy specifically that would delineate what the Milwaukee Police Department's relationship with federal immigration agencies is. And, at a minimum standard, not doing anything illegal, but doing something that community can see and everyone will know, advocates will know, domestic violence, advocates will know and can agree upon. So I think that without a secure process for asylum, which we don't have right now, folks, we've blown this up a little bit too. Folks are waiting in other countries now in order to get asylum status, where it can be very dangerous to travel or otherwise. I think one thing to highlight is, though it's very sensationalized when Trump talks about caravans coming, there are LGBT caravans as well that tend to travel along those lines as well, in part because of discrimination that comes through in traveling with the larger group. And so there's just a ton of folks that are, one, being incarcerated here for being undocumented or having some sort of problem with the law, and at that intersection in detention centers and not getting the justice they need as victims in this culture that we have right now that is so centered around hate. And so that's what she's up to tonight, trying to maintain that a little bit at the city level. So I'll add that, and I think that's a place to, like you said, Tony, where our rights are so transient, unfortunately, and why it's so important that we establish a culture of, what is civil rights in our cities, what does that mean in our communities.
Could you expand a little bit on that level with the MPD or the police department in the work you and I know Shelley had done with the Milwaukee Police Department regarding the site operation procedures for trans and gender nonconforming people? How that works, for a different level.
No, that's a great segue.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
Well, Shelley, myself, and a bunch of other advocates worked on a policy with the police department, basically trying to establish as clear a relationship as possible about how you can talk to someone respectfully. If you've had a police officer come to you in a dangerous moment, where something's just happened or otherwise, they're not the first resource to go to, right? But they still show up. You want things to go as smoothly as possible. So through this policy, we were able to change. And I'm going to back up just a second. In 2016, Milwaukee Police Department released a policy that tried to do what we're talking about. In this policy, they wanted to ask you if you weren't clear as to what gender you were, if you had male genitalia or did not have male genitalia. They were going to, what was some of the other ones? I forget even the original policy. But point being is that they proved many times throughout the process that we did that they did not understand our community, and let alone this was a policy too that there was nothing set up after any Jeffrey Dahmer or other folks who was targeting young queer folks or otherwise in the wake of that. So there was no policy relating to how the police department was interacting with lesbian, gay, bisexual, or trans folks at all. Nothing after. This is also too somewhat before the Pulse shooting or otherwise, and so having those relationships ahead of time, I think, was really critical to, again, trying to build that bridge of changing at least some of the culture and the relationship, so that we as a community can hold them more accountable in the times where they're going to show up.
And it's a model SOP. Charlotte took it on, and I think they're working with the SOP that some of these folks created. So outstanding. SOP. Site operating procedures.
Oh, yes.
For the MPD. Standard
operating procedures.
Standard operating procedures.
Thank you. Well, that was a really great lead-in, actually, to the next question, which I was going to have Tony kick off. And we've really, kind of started getting at this question a little bit already. But so, how is a broad concept of inclusion or multi-issue politics or issues an advantage or disadvantage to the LGBTQ rights movement? So, how do you see these? Sort of intersectional and inclusion concepts and topics, interacting with our movement. Add anything more?
I think a lot of it is intersectional, and we have to accept that and be intentional about it. First of all, in my thinking again, if we don't take on racism head on, we're not taking on anybody's movement or rights or human rights. We have to be intentional about all of them across the board and look out for each other, and that's important. And I think it's a cross-section of education as well. I think we need to educate each other and educate people within our own communities. And that's what is disheartening sometimes when I even talk with them. It just recently happened. I read a post on Facebook from someone within our community, and I mentioned inclusive all gender restrooms in my post, and they're coming back and saying something like, that's enough. We've done enough. We've got marriage equality. Why are we worrying about restrooms? There are bigger things in our world that are impacting us. But that was from, and I'm not going to call the person out, but that was a white cisgender male that made that statement. They have no clue. Everything's good for me, and it might be good for you, but it's not good for everyone. And we know this on a broader concept throughout Milwaukee and throughout this nation, and even this economy is not impacting everyone positively.
Now,
Yeah, James.
He brought up something very specifically that hit me was about the education. When you think about a lot of the issues that I'm going to say our movement, because this is our time, this is our civil rights time. I think about while we're having these conversations and doing all of the things that we can do to protect our LGBT community, there's still education that needs to occur when we think about race, because as a black gay man, my experience being black and gay may not be the same experience as a white gay man. And understanding that in some aspects, when you think about the black gay man's, not every black gay man goes through these kind of issues, but you think about the youth who decide to come out. And on one end, there is conversion camps that we're debunking and getting rid of, but then I think about the kids who get kicked out and then are on the streets. And taking me back to my first statement in the first question, when you put those kids in, or youth or young adults in those spaces, it puts them at a higher risk of contracting HIV. So when I think about education as a whole, I think about the need to continue to have conversations around race, and how sometimes we cross paths based off of how we identify, but then at that same point in time, we may not still relate everything to each other. I think about at Vivint Health, we just had a 3-day all-staff summit where all of the entire organization from Denver, Colorado, and then St. Louis, Missouri, they came here to Milwaukee, and we had someone come and speak to us about, dealing with culture sometimes in the workplace, and how culture in the workplace is not always understood, and how at sometimes a black man may be just being very expressive and excited about how he's handling a situation, but someone who doesn't understand that would see it as aggressive or threatening. And then I think about not just here in the city of Milwaukee or just this day, I just think on a national level when you think about race and different cultures going into different neighborhoods, and that's that fear of another black gay man coming into a predominantly white neighborhood and what it's going to turn out to be when not everyone wears or carries that walk. And the same thing of a white gay man coming to move into a predominantly, black neighborhood. Sometimes the conversation needs to happen on both sides. It will take more people to want to continue to have the conversation, to want to educate on a local and a state, international level, everyone. I mean, we are all very intellectual, smart human beings here in this room, so we understand. Conversations about being sex positive, not in a sense to create a hypersexual culture, but to have the conversation about we're human beings, we're going to engage in sex. And I only bring it up because he said there needs to be a pillar. So when I think about all of the other issues that we think about, we have those people moving around the world, but what are we doing to penetrate the minds of the people who are either blatantly disregarding the education or spreading more hate?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it reminds me that a lot of it comes back to changing the sort of default, whether it's just basic safety and comfort for ourselves in our homes and our workplaces and public places and wherever we go, that the default isn't straight white cisgender people. So definitely anybody yeah, go ahead. I was just trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, listening to both Tony and then particularly James talk, I mean, I think the next question then sort of becomes like, how do we do those things, right? Because we don't have these conversations, or not everybody's having these conversations, like James said, or not absorbing the information, or not acting on it. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, I get a lot of people who come to us and say like, oh, what can I do, or what can our organization do to support trans people? And it's like, what can you do? Like, be a good person. You're sitting in a position of privilege, so open your damn mouth, right? Like, we need our allies to support us. And I think it is really incumbent upon people who are in, what have been traditionally dominant cultures to step up. And that doesn't mean step up and take the place of somebody, but it means step up and talk to your compatriots about their behavior and start holding people accountable for their behavior. I mean, otherwise, I don't know how we ever get to a place where we have those conversations.
It starts with one person. I mean, it starts with spaces like this. I think about when I haven't been on a panel in some years, but I think about when I used to be on panels at UWM and having to speak sometimes about the Black gay experience sometimes and how it's different than the white gay experience on campus, and those things that make us different, but not figuring a way to bring them together. I think the conversation just needs to start going, and sometimes it also takes people in our own communities to start these conversations with our own people to start to change those minds. I definitely know the hardest struggle is to penetrate the long lineage of family who's built around hatred and bigotry.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions from the audience at this point? All right, just checking in, make sure. So the next question, originally I had sort of picked on people to try to plug in and make sure everyone had a chance to go first. So for this one, actually, it was back to James, but definitely, the question is for everyone. So is just, if you think that there are any sort of particular populations, this is, kind of a segue from the previous question, but any particular populations within the larger LGBTQ plus community that are at risk of losing their rights in society, or never, being able to make that next step in gaining them. And I think, one sort of idea comes from some of the comments that Tony made, which are, that right now in this world we had made a lot of gains on the federal level, incremental and, to be fair, but like we had made a lot of gains, and now we've just seen this like relentless rollback of thing after thing after thing, in particular around gender identity, but also immigration status, so many different identities. So
same-sex parents adopting.
It's just all these rollbacks at the federal level. So, again, so the question would just be if there are, any, other thoughts about particular populations within our community that would be, something like that we haven't necessarily touched on yet.
We've talked about so many different things, but I think about on the large LGBT community level, and not just thinking state or nationally, just thinking internationally. I think about the complete protection of my trans brothers and sisters, and that has no complete barrier on race in itself. It's just in general the hatred and bigotry around them wanting and going through the steps that they need to go to become comfortable with themselves, and then trying to go in society and live a full, thriving, successful life, and all the things that they have to go through. Just even starting with the process of going to get a name change and how all of that works. I think our state is doing a great job with that, but I think on a large level, I think for me, myself, I think that community of our family in our community is most at risk because of all of the things that are currently going on.
Jason or Olivia?
I know Jason and I were talking about something earlier that hit on this, is that marriage equality happened.
Yeah.
And people out there thought it was the end all. That this is great. This is what you got. Anecdotally, I'll tell you, I had a high school friend. I posted something, and she's quite the progressive and affirming person. But she wrote back, and this is in South Carolina. So I said something like, "You can get married on Sunday, and then fired from your job on Monday. There are no protections in 27 states, I believe, for sexual orientation." And she was like, "Oh, I can't believe that. Where I work, there's protections." I said, "Where you work, you're a nurse at a hospital with protections." But again, that doesn't affect and protect everyone. And I think even within our own community, donors have not given as strongly anymore to organizations, including Fair Wisconsin, and many of the state organizations, all of them, because they think, well, what else are we fighting for? Well, you hear it on this panel, and I know you know it out there. We're fighting for a whole lot more than marriage equality. It's just the tip. You said it's just getting started, right?
Well, and I think this dovetails into your next question, Megan, a little bit about steps forward that the movement has made since marriage equality. I think we started it in the conversation tonight in a very dark way about all the things that we don't have yet, and I think that's important because we have to recognize what we don't have. But I do think we have taken some steps forward since marriage equality in some ways, and I don't think it is a result of marriage equality itself. But I think it's a result of marriage equality helping people's perspectives change. And I think when you have, in 2012, a president come out for the first time and support marriage equality, it allowed a lot of politicians, it allowed a lot of business owners, a lot of people in the community to think, okay, maybe this is okay. And that's when I saw, a slow tipping point forward around steps forward because people were willing to speak out a little more. Now, it isn't as far as we always want them to go, but as we've seen, the movement really moving forward since that, the fact that we elected a new governor in Wisconsin, and the very first executive order was around protecting LGBT state employees. Like, that was remarkable.
Trans state
employees, yeah.
And contractors.
And
all the other.
But that was a huge step forward, and I think because we've been able to move that dialogue, and I think of it, I come from the LGBT chambers lens. We've seen it with the corporate side stepping up. They've kind of been there, but about 2 or 3 years ago, WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, were proposing a statewide piece of legislation that would prohibit local communities from doing non-discrimination ordinances on a local level. Their preemption bill, similar to kind of what happened in North Carolina. And the business community stepped up in a big way. And I know several of our core partners of the chamber who are conservative businesses called and said, this is wrong, we need to protect the LGBT community in this. It's particularly the trans community because it was around those local non-discrimination ordinances that would apply in Milwaukee or Madison, but not statewide. Who stepped up and said, this is the thing to do. I don't know if before marriage equality we would have had business owners standing up necessarily saying that in business companies. I think that was the tipping point that allowed people to be forward. Now, I think we need to continue pushing them to do more and more and to take stances and to be active fighting for the positive changes we need. But I think of steps forward, I think we've made a couple. We've got a whole lot more to go, but I think marriage equality helped a little bit along that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sort of one of the things that makes me think about is also like around the efforts to bring an end to conversion therapy or so-called therapy, that there have been some surprising groups and people that you might not automatically think of that have been willing to, just like conservative legislators who've been willing to sign on to the bill, and different groups that have come out in support of different local efforts, and there really have been a lot of them happening very quickly. And again, I always do give a shout out to Milwaukee for like launching that, because then it was just like dominoes with a lot of the other cities, and there are probably every month I get calls from like 1 or 2 more communities that are like, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that. So I think that's a really good point. Anybody else? Oh yeah, yeah.
Go ahead. Whoever's down there.
I was about to call Olivia.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I I guess when I think about this, there's been so much good commentary, but I think that we can kind of refocus again on two groups of folks that really kind of intersect, which is just young folks, you know, all the way down from little babies to families as a whole structure, and society's way to look at a whole unit as something that can accept and love people regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and the ways that we as a society have control over that. Now, that's not really a legal law or otherwise, but you know, I think that there's many ways that you pull out of that are, you know, can be really, really helpful for someone in that situation. You know, when we talk about conversion therapy, the people who are really being targeted are young folks. You know, when we think about that context, like those are those folks that have run away from home or been pushed out of their homes and are now in group homes. And then the group home is a private contractor who contracts with a private therapist or is religiously leaning or otherwise, has no expertise, has nothing there because they're a private contractor, right? Like we suffer from a lot of social services that are outsourced. People die in like Milwaukee County Jail when Sheriff Clark was around because of negligence like that. That is a pervasive issue throughout our society of really dehumanizing folks and giving control to institutions to have their private opinion on something like that. I think another intersection that's really important when it comes to youth is like when we think about, I'll say from personal experience. So in my family, my grandmother immigrated from Mexico, from Merida, Yucatan, and when I came out, maybe whatever, like 6-7 years ago, some long time ago now, she had a really difficult time accepting me. You know, I think many stories, you know, scared. Now we're better, but one of the difficulties that I encounter with other folks is that, like, when we talk about gender identity in Spanish, like literally the language is gender. You know, there are just male or female. You know, teachers have a gender. Inanimate objects have genders. There's a lot of genders to go around, and so changing that culturally, getting people to, you know, accept a broader sense. Things really need to be appropriate for the community that you're working in and for the community that you're a part of. And so again, youth really suffer because of that. Because when we think about these agencies, you know, like G-Safe that does amazing work, or local agencies that operate in schools, Planned Parenthood, the one that I'm a part of, to be really intentional about setting things up so that it's appropriate for this youth and then for the whole family. So, yeah, I'll leave it.
Shelley, you want to?
I sort of do, but I also don't want to be too dark. Because I'm going to take a contrary position and say that I'm annoyed by the marriage equality movement and what it did for the rest of the movement. And partly I'll say that it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'll, you know,
that's real.
I'll also say it because you know, I think it's good that we hear that perspective as well. I mean, some of us are old enough to have remembered doing this work before marriage equality sort of became the big movement, you know, that it was. And you know, how did that happen? How did we get marriage equality? I mean, we spent a shit ton of money, and we worked out of Washington D.C. and people who had privilege and influence like helped with that a great deal. And you know, when we talk about people who think there's nothing left to do for our community, it's those people. It's the people with privilege who, you know, felt like marriage equality was their issue. You know, that's the way in which they're oppressed, and they wanted to do something about that, and they did. And you know, congratulations. But when we talk about things like trans rights, and you know, there were cases sitting in the Supreme Court about discrimination at work for gay people and trans people. And when the Supreme Court heard the case about trans people, I mean, they acted like they had never heard of these concepts before, ever. And these are very smart people, you know, and those lawyers were standing there and having to tell them, Supreme Court, no, federal courts all over this country have been upholding these rights and protecting people at work for 20 years. So none of this work is new. This is stuff that's been going on for a long, long time. And I do think that some of the effect, you know, of the big push for marriage equality was that some of that work got deprioritized, and I think to some degree, maybe forgotten about a little bit, or some of the history of the work that we're still doing. I think maybe we forgot about it a little bit, and so I think it's important for all of us to really have some perspective on marriage equality and what that was and how that sort of sits in the longer picture, bigger picture.
Supreme Court, intellectual.
Brewing here.
Yeah, well, we talk about intellect, but some of the most intellectual are the most ignorant. So, yeah, so interesting that they are so smart.
I was going to say the same thing. The smartest people in the world can be the most conservative individuals, have the most sense of hatred and bigotry grounded in them so much that it's just oblivious to them. I think about the Marriage Equality Act, and the first thing I kind of can think of as I'm sitting here listening to everyone is you give a kid a piece of candy and let them go be, and they'll be okay, fine, be happy. No, that child needs a sustainable meal, food, clothing, and shelter, all of the above. So to take that philosophy and put it on our community and think we don't have other things that need to be taken care of, is far-fetched. I think about history, and when I think about history, I think about the Civil Rights Movement and how our community wanted to jump into that movement because how much it meant for the whole community and the messages of equality centered around it, that even in that space, part my own culture was like, no, this is not the time, this is not the place. And now, like I said before, now we're in our civil rights movement to sit and pass a few laws on a federal level and just like put a band on and say it's gonna be okay. No.
Yeah, I think those are really great points, and it kind of speaks to the idea, like you were saying, that for our entire community there is a huge spectrum of issues people are facing, from having almost none or literally none of their basic needs being met to people sort of on the other end of the spectrum who are, I agree with you, Shelley, like a lot of the champions for marriage, they had the privilege and luxury of being able to focus on that because their basic needs were being met. They had, managed to have economic security even in the face of the sort of legal discrimination that they were still facing, but, had privilege and food security and things, and were able to focus more on, sort of legal discrimination or, trying to bring an end to that in different ways. So I think, kind of as a segue into the next question, which is, what role do we see organizations playing in the future of the movement? I think one thought that, is reinforced for me that, and I try to bring this to Fair Wisconsin, and, also the shout out to G-Safe, that they're, one of the other statewide groups. We share an office with them and partner very closely with them, that we, try to, everything we do as an organization in the work, we're looking at specific goals, trying to get, help get specific bills passed, or at least some progress, or local ordinances and things, and a lot of that focuses on legal rights, but never taking an eye off of that, idea that the whole community we need to make sure that people's basic needs can be met, and that we don't ever stop, also like striving for that in the work that we do, because legal protections aren't going to matter much if you are, on the street and hungry, or suffering from violence, or, all of the myriad things that we talked about. So throwing it back to everybody, again, what if you, see, what role you see organizations playing in this, moving forward, and how we can support the organization?
I think moving forward to continue these fights and battles that we are fighting currently, it needs to be a combination of not Fortune 500 companies. It needs to be a multitude of large, medium, small, and starter-up heads of organizations, CEOs, directors, supervisors coming together as a collective community, and not individually trying to take things on. Because the biggest thing that I've learned in working in community since I was 15, 16 years old is it takes a village to raise a child. So if you apply that same philosophy to the work that needs to be done, it's going to take a village of heads of organizations on all different size levels to change the minds and educate the community on what it means to actually be together and work together for a complete safe haven for all individuals, not just in their personal lives, not just through marriage, and not just at work, but the whole umbrella of life.
Well, I think allies are so important in coming together, but that goes back to Jason's point and the work they've been able to do. And I'm not speaking for the Chamber, I see the work, because the Chamber has been able to work with all of these different corporations and companies, but not now from marriage equality to gender inclusive policies, which has been great. So we can see this move. We can see Milwaukee Pride go from this huge festival that we all have a party and have a great time, but guess right now we're sitting here having a meaningful discussion on a small, intimate level. But this intimate discussion is so very important because we're learning from each other. I'm learning from you and you and you, and together we become stronger because we become more informed. So thankfully we are working toward this, and everything you're doing in Madison, we just need to pay attention to each other and figure out how we can be more helpful to each other.
Well, and I think it's also people continuing the community to support these organizations as well, yes, in both in terms of money, which is key, but also volunteerism and stepping out and being supported, because most of our organizations are small, led by just a few staff people and a dedicated board and some volunteers. So we need more people stepping up to be part of that, because while it may be incremental changes that many of us are making, piece by piece by piece, those incremental changes will add up into something larger. And I think that's key. I remember I was actually board chair at Fair Wisconsin the day when we had marriage equality. And we were on a phone call saying, well, this is great, but this also sucks because it means people are going to think it's all done. And I think we just need to keep reminding people around the work that we still have yet to do to achieve that full lived equality experience, that what needs to be done, and continue to talk about why people need to support and give to these organizations, I think is key, because it is the groups around, not only in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, but around the country and around the globe, fighting for LGBT rights, whether it is in healthcare or social justice or LGBT immigration rights or workplace equality or economic justice, whatever that field may be. It's those groups that are really going to continue to drive that change that we need going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think we know, and I think history's taught us that working in coalition is the way that we succeed. I think especially, to the extent we just kind of have a binary political system and paint with broad strokes, I'll just sort of say, like, our side of things. We're so fractured, and we have been forever, but, the way we get things done is to come together. And I love, I think this is something, there are good things and bad things about labor unions, and I mean, something that I think we've lost a lot of is a lot of the leadership that labor unions could provide for political mobilizing. They're not great, they don't always take great positions, they don't always treat all their members great, but there's a framework there, and there's a structure that unites, in a lot of ways, the whole left. So environmentalists, people working on racial justice, people working on disability justice. I mean, we should all be working together, ideally. So, as James said, keep starting conversations, I guess.
Olivia, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. I think very pragmatically, we're going into a huge election year coming in 2022, so I think that, one of the roles that organizations play is accountability to the community as well. In terms of if we're going to be advocating for those rights, that we can also seek a bigger grassroots movement, that we can start bringing people together to have more conversations like this in a discussion rather than just a panel, so that we can actually build a stronger platform, I think. I generally feel in the work that I do with Planned Parenthood as an advocate who interacts with legislators that they're shamefully like uninformed about like what issues we're talking about in this room, what issues do we need, and you know, there's a level of of work that goes on with them, but I also think that people are really ready, you know, to get active and get in folks' faces. Like with the team that I work with, even on driver's cards, you know, if you're undocumented or otherwise, and you can't get access to a vehicle, like you can't actually have a driver's license, which is a right that we had in 2007, up until 2007 in Wisconsin, that that there's still so little information that is known about the issue, yeah, so I really want to see more local conversations and more accountability for organizations. I think the other thing I would like to shout out is that organizations need to keep on hiring us. These businesses need to keep on hiring us as LGBT persons. I come from Public Allies, which is an AmeriCorps program, which is awesome. I love it. And when I was there, I was the only trans person there. And now I was here in this year, it's like classic, like 45%. Like half of them are queer, like half of that is trans, you know, and they work at nonprofits all over the city. Like that's what that organization does. Look it up. And yeah, so I think there's really good ways that we can create more opportunities for us to talk to each other, but also get paid. People really need money. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll work on it.
And I think what she was saying about accountability and organizations being held accountable for either past practices or holding themselves accountable, knowing that they've never always been completely right when they speak about something, but being intentional and going into the community and having the conversations like we're doing now. And not so much like she was saying, not so much just as in a panel discussion, but having a conversation, getting to know the community that you want to come in, or getting to know some of the social determinants that that particular community is dealing with versus what your predominant community is like. I think about just my shared experience of growing up in life. I've lived in shelters, I've lived in bad neighborhoods, I've lived in suburbs, I went to suburban schools, I went to a city school. All of those exposures cultivated who I am, but not everyone goes through those same shared experiences to know that when you cross the railroad, you know how to protect yourself and be safe without being ostracized. But sometimes it takes organizations to be held accountable to, when they want to do the work for different communities, to be intentional about what they're doing and not just intentional for the services that they're providing, but on the flip side, like she said, hiring us, giving all of us opportunities for growth. And if being hired means you getting a frontline position job, giving them that job, but also supporting them to give them other enhanced skills so that they can go and grow into a different space, so they're not stuck in a frontline space. I think about Ricardo Wynn. He's doing some really great work with the state HIV program. I'm a fellow cohort from the Wisconsin Health Leaders Fellowship cohort, and I learned a tremendous amount of things that, some things I've already knew because of my own experiences, but on the other side, things that I didn't know. But it was because of opportunities given to my direct community and the things that we face. I think about the Black and Brown San Gino 11 community here, and them knowing that they want a safe space for them to be able to be their authentic selves without feeling judged or seeming like they're threatened. I know some of the programs and events that I support my staff who put them together. I support them not just because I'm their supervisor, but I support them because they're intentionally having conversations with the community. They're intentionally engaged with the community, and the results of those events turn out. Like we just had a skate night not too long ago, neighborhood house in the basement. We had 91 people show up. 20 different people decided to want to get tested. We distributed over 500 different condoms, but it wasn't just about my staff wanted to put on an event for community and just doing it, they invested themselves in getting to know the community,
Right.
getting to know what's going to make that event work and make that tick. And I think about the same approach when you think about organizations wanting to do works in different communities. It's not that they don't want to do it. Sometimes community only sees what they know. So if you're, say for instance, me going into a predominantly white neighborhood and just intentionally trying to work with the neighborhood, I don't look like the neighborhood, they're not going to come associate themselves with me. Or if I show up in baggier clothes, they're going to think that I'm a thug or I'm this, that, or whatever. I'm far from a thug. I could never even see myself ripping and running the streets. And then flip it on the same side. When we have white individuals who community doesn't feel is invested into them, you get the same result.
Yeah.
Could I'd like to offer both an example of what we're talking about,
Yeah, that's great.
as well as do a little educational plug for the Milwaukee Municipal ID. Has anybody heard of that? Okay. So the city gives out IDs the same way the state gives out IDs, and it's only good really within the city. And it does a couple things that are really awesome. First of all, it's $10. Number two, it's got 4 gender markers. Okay, so male, female, and then there's one for non-binary, and there's one for like other or non-disclosed.
Yeah.
So you don't have to disclose. You get a picture taken, and you can choose the name that goes on the card. So these are great for lots of people. They're great for trans folks who can't afford or don't have resources to do name and gender marker changes on their ID. The really nice thing about this card is that the Milwaukee Police Department is required to accept it as your official government ID. So you can carry this in your pocket and leave your state ID at home, and the Milwaukee Police Department must accept this. So for folks who don't, have incongruencies between their IDs and the way they appear, this helps a lot with that. For the folks that Livia is talking about, who have been deprived of the right to get a state ID, folks can get this ID who are undocumented from the city, and then they can use it to go pick up prescriptions. You got to show an ID when you pick up a prescription. You might have to show an ID to get into MPS to pick your kid up from school. So, and this was something that was done by Livia and Christine and Vosis really took the lead on it, with folks who do economic justice
organizations
work, LGBT organizations. Yeah, it's a huge coalition of people, and this benefits all of us. And my organization will buy these if you need help buying one. So just call me.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. Let's jump right in.
I was just going to ask, as far as ID is concerned, if it only works it's only accepted in the city of Milwaukee or the county as a whole?
It's also accepted in the county. They passed a resolution for that a while ago.
The sheriff's department, or who accepts it? Or?
Well, the sheriff's department doesn't have a standing policy to interact with it, but the Milwaukee County supervisors declared that the Milwaukee ID is a valid government ID in the Milwaukee County.
So
Okay.
maybe like county
got it.
services, if you go to like a job center or even things like that, that might be like county offices and services.
Say like the
that are
county
technically
libraries.
county offices. Yeah.
School systems are really a good one. The sheriff's office is kind of a gray area because there isn't, that's one of the things that
We're
came out
working
of
on
that
it.
policy, right, that we talked about with the Milwaukee Police Department. They actually reference the Milwaukee ID. They have a way to talk to you if you have an extra on your ID. So, it's, you really need some back education with that. The sheriff's department is a willing participant, but we're not quite there yet. So,
Gonna get there.
I would say the other thing that the Milwaukee ID kind of serves, but doesn't really, is when it comes to employment protections, right? For folks like that, the city of Milwaukee has employment protections for gender identity, but you can't present the Milwaukee ID in an application. So there's a gray area where the state and kind of this incongruent ID don't really match up. But it's still valid, your rights are still valid. Insofar as people should be treating you with respect. And so this ID serves culturally some places more than you would expect legally. to say like, yeah, the city of Milwaukee does do this. The city of Milwaukee backs it up, and it's so real that it's here in my hand, you know, stamped by government agency.
And bars have accepted it. Liquor stores, you know, for those buying beverages,
You can't. They're not supposed to either.
What,
Yeah.
they have. So I mean, I can't guarantee it.
Yeah.
And you can't use it to
anything.
vote. Cannot use it to vote. So the state doesn't recognize it, or those laws don't. So understand that as well. But just speaking of that, those are not, two more powerful things you can participate in, and that's voting and making sure your friends and family vote. Second of all, the census is coming up.
Yes.
That is so important to participate in the census. Please do that.
I'm here too.
There you go.
All right.
Good job, information.
Good.
Wonderful.
So we have about a little more than 5 minutes left. So yeah, questions. Go ahead.
So, a little less about legal rights, but a little bit more about maybe the term LGBT spaces, or I think you were kind of alluding a little bit about like where organizations will be going forward in life. I remember meeting with a LGBT funder who was like, this was a long time ago, but was envisioning, we don't need kind of brick and mortar spaces. Social media will be we'll have community up in the cloud, or and then, so that's kind of one example of a thought, and the other one is just an observation of like fewer gay or lesbian bars today. I mean, are these positive outcomes? Or I guess, how do people feel about that? The idea of community, physical spaces, safe spaces for LGBT folks.
I think I speak for myself and to my experience of dealing with community and not having the complete space to be myself. So yes, I've been raised in all these different types of neighborhoods, but I personally don't care for techno or pop music. So if I can't, I'm a person who likes rap music and R&B music, and that particular, I'm just thinking in a club space,
Right.
Not playing any clubs or anything like that, but just thinking in the space of, you're talking about spaces and sometimes why there does need to be either a separation or at least a space where they can feel like they get all of what they want, and not feel ostracized because of a behavior or a look, is different. So like me, I can go into the club dressed like this and probably won't get turned away or something like that or whatever because I'm dressed neat. But say for instance, someone that I know in the community doesn't like to dress this way. They like to wear Timbs, or they like to wear Jordans, and they like to wear, some baggier jeans, or not dress in a way that is considered appropriate, but it's appropriate for them and how they feel as being comfortable. You keep that divide going still. Not saying that, clubs and safe spaces here don't do what they can to provide those safe spaces. It's just knowing that it's not there. I come from a time when we used to have a bar called Conversations on Byrd. Then we used to have Byrd. For specific reasons, it's no longer around. But at that same point in time, even as a college student, up until they were gone, I did not care about everything else that was going on in there. That was my safe space where I knew I could just be myself, and if I wanted to do what everyone else was doing, I wouldn't be judged per se. I wouldn't even say that all the clubs here do that. I just think about when you think on a national level about spaces and stuff like that. You go to a different city like DC or Atlanta. I think Minneapolis, the Gay 90s is like the perfect, for me in my experience, the Gay 90s is the perfect bar because it has music in every different area where you don't have to stay in one space, and they don't have this obscene dress code, but I can go in one bar, get my R&B, rap music, nice space, turn up with my community. Someone who's not a part of my direct community can go into another room, get pop or techno music, go upstairs for the drag show, go behind the bar, because we know bars do things. People do things at bars where if I don't feel like being around a whole bunch of people, I just want to be in a safe space, and something comes on the screen, I'm not, I guess, taken back by it.
Yeah, I think like trying to work so that people don't have to feel like they're choosing between their identities
Yes.
when they go to places to feel comfortable, and also kind of back to that idea about like what we all think of as what the default is, you know, like that there shouldn't be a default of to like what is, you know, sort of the standard or normal or expected, that having trying to create places that don't force people into those boxes, basically. I think we all would benefit. And I think maybe with your idea of the, you know, sort of cyberspace, I think one thing that I think has been beneficial is that it does, I mean, the world has expanded. I think we all can think of different ways that, you know, we think of like how much access to information and ideas and things that we have. But it's also, you know, it's not perfect and it's not always great either. Because if we're not like also making sure that we're, you know, trying to get rid of the idea of the default, or to like make sure that those like virtual spaces are also inclusive and not forcing people into different boxes or, you know, things. And then just the sheer volume of stuff coming at you, you know, to think about like information and what's, you know, credible and what's safe, and you know, there's a lot. So
It's defined by the individual, and
Yeah.
that cyber can be painful because people are hurtful. And then I think it goes on to neighborhoods. People don't want to leave their neighborhoods; they feel safe there, and that's something else to consider.
Well, and I just underscore if I could.
We'll just do quick. Oh yeah, sorry. There's
Tony, kind of like you guys know. I mean, you're on the board of the community center, and you know, I think that's a demonstration there. Like, you know, there are a lot of parts of our population that really do require some supports that I think are supports that are given in the physical place. So, you know, kids that are being kicked out of their homes. So we know that like family support of LGBT kids is the #1 predictor for their outcomes in life. And when their parents boot them out the door, I mean, it turns out another adult can take that place, you know, and help guide kids and give them the support and the love that they need. And so those are things that happen in, you know, physical spaces with each other.
The virtual spaces can never replace the like human need for those actual physical spaces.
Right. Folks who aren't out.
Yeah.
Community center may be the only place they go and see other people. So.
You guys kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Prior to 2015 or 2015 prior, there's a huge drive for marriage equality. You know, there's a lot of fundraising, a lot of focused energy saying, let that happen. It's happened, yay, we got it. Again, it's very much like you're asking about what's next. I'm kind of wondering about with that occurrence, now moving on, you have all these other groups that are now trying to pick up this little piece, trying to do that little piece. Is there really a sense of commonality of this is where we need to be focusing our efforts on amongst these different groups, or is everybody kind of just running around doing their own thing where, again, before it was all marriage. Now everybody's kind of...
Well, I'll just jump in and say that I think actually, so Fair Wisconsin as a state equality group, we're part of a federation that's called Equality Federation, and it helps connect us with all the other sort of Fair Wisconsins in all the other states. Most of the states have at least one group that's similar to what we do. Some groups are, you know, like us plus GSAFE and Diverse and Resilient all rolled into one. Some states have even more, you know, separate groups, but what it allows me to sort of compare, like, how are we doing compared to other states, and what are the challenges we face, and what are the, you know, things that we've done. And I do think, and just, you know, having events like this, or being part of events like this, and all the groups in Wisconsin, I think we do a pretty good job in Wisconsin of, you know, staying in touch with each other and working together, and, you know, we all kind of have our sort of, you know, niche area that we focus, like we, you know, FAIR focuses on the kind of policy side of things. You know, GSAFE does Safe Schools. The centers do the physical spaces and direct services and programs, Diverse and Resilient. I'm gonna say it wrong, Vivint. violence. I almost said the old.
No.
You know, are focusing on public health and, you know, different issues, community groups, you know, groups like Forge and again, also diverse and resilient, focusing on violence and anti-violence and, you know, all the different ways that we're all doing it. But like in the beginning of 2017, after, you know, the new administration had started doing things on the federal level, and it was just like every day you wake up and be like afraid to look at your phone, like what thing happened today. We, for a while, and Tony was in this group, and there were, you know, basically different people in sort of leadership roles from a bunch of all the different LGBT and sort of, you know, affiliated groups, just having regular conference calls to all keep in touch, like, this is what we're doing. We're going to have these, you know, actions or these events, and some of it was like, you know, here we're going to organize this virtual, like, contact your, you know, representative, or we're having a rally, or we're having, you know, just to try to keep in touch. So, and, you know, the focus was very much, and then so as we kind of sort of got used to the way things are now, for lack of a better way to put it, we, you know, we don't have as frequent of check-ins as we used to, but we all still, like, you know, in practice, I mean, we all, like, still have a really good, you know, relationship. We try to stay pretty connected and working in our areas, but always keeping an eye on checking in with each other, and always, you know, focusing on what are the new emerging issues and basic needs and identities and all that stuff, like we talked about. So, I feel like I don't know if I should take the last word or not, but we are basically out of time. So, with that, I just want to say thanks to everybody. We'll be, you know, here a few more minutes. I mean, we can, you know, mingle if there's any other little questions, but we'll conclude the sort of official panel. And thanks again to Vince and Pride Fest and for organizing this, and everybody from all the great organizations, and all of you for coming out tonight. It's really cold. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.